I never thought the most dangerous moment of my life would begin on a train seat. My name is Jasper, a simple omega who spent his small existence shuttling between his bookstore and apartment. Nothing more. But tonight, when my exhausted eyes finally closed and my head just fell against his shoulder, I knew my world would never be the same again. I don't know how long I slept. Maybe 10 minutes. Maybe longer. Time becomes irrelevant when exhaustion takes over. But when I woke, the first thing I registered was a sharp, dark scent of cedarwood and smoke, the kind of scent that only belongs to an enigma. My heart stopped completely. Enigmas, those beings omegas are taught to avoid at all costs. Rare, dangerous, and utterly unpredictable. I jerked my head up violently, my cheeks already burning with embarrassment. I am so sorry, I didn't mean to. My words died in my throat when I actually looked at him. He was breathtaking, impossibly tall even while seated, with a sharp jawline that could cut glass, and eyes, silver gray, exactly like storm clouds before lightning strikes. His presence alone was so powerful that every omega instinct I possessed screamed at me to run. Yet I couldn't move. I was completely frozen. "It's all right," he said, his voice deep and strangely calm, though there was an edge to it that made my skin prickle. "You looked exhausted." His politeness made me even more uncomfortable. Enigmas aren't polite. They're territorial, possessive, commanding. So what was this? "I should move," I whispered, clutching my bag like it could somehow protect me. "Stay." Just one word. A single word. But it froze me in place more effectively than any physical restraint. I looked at him, confused and frightened. His gaze was fixed on me, studying me like I was some kind of puzzle he needed to solve. Then he leaned forward, close enough that I could drown in his overwhelming scent. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer now but still commanding in a way that made my spine tingle. Jasper." I stammered, hating how weak I sounded. "Jasper." He said my name like it was something precious, something that already belonged to him. "I'm Caspian." Caspian. That name? I'd heard it before. In newspapers, in whispered conversations in dark corners. The Enigma Mafia boss of the East Coast. Oh God, I held my breath, panic rising in my chest like a tidal wave. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of nightmare. "Relax, Jasper," Caspian said, leaning back casually as if he hadn't just turned my entire life upside down. "You only used my shoulder. I haven't killed you. Not yet." My brain screamed silently. The train began to slow down. My stop was approaching. I stood up quickly, nearly tripping over my own feet in my haste. I have to go." "See you around, Jasper," Caspian said softly, but his smile, that smile was predatory, like a wolf watching prey it had already marked. When I stumbled off the train, my entire body was trembling. I ran across the platform toward my apartment building, Caspian's silver-gray eyes haunting my thoughts. But what frightened me most wasn't that he'd noticed me, it was that he'd let me go. And somehow that freedom felt more dangerous than any cage. That night I lay in my apartment, restless and unable to sleep properly, trying to convince myself it was just a one-time encounter. Maybe I'd never see him again. Maybe I could just forget this ever happened and return to my peaceful, quiet life. But fate has a twisted sense of humor. The next morning, I went to work at my bookstore trying to act normal. I organized shelves, helped customers, made small talk about book recommendations. Everything felt routine, safe. But underneath that normalcy, something had shifted inside me. I kept catching myself thinking about those storm cloud eyes, that commanding voice, that impossible presence. I shook my head, forcing myself to focus on work. I was being ridiculous. One encounter with an enigma didn't mean anything. It was just a random moment on a train. Nothing more. But as the day progressed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Not someone. Something. Like a shadow had attached itself to my existence. By the time I closed the bookstore that evening, the sun was setting and streetlights were beginning to flicker on. I locked the door, pulled my jacket tighter around myself and started walking toward the subway station. The streets were relatively empty, just a few people hurrying home. That's when I felt it again. That prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The unmistakable feeling of being observed. I quickened my pace, my omega instinct screaming warnings I couldn't quite decipher. Was I being paranoid? Was this just residual anxiety from meeting Caspian? I turned a corner and my heart nearly stopped. A black SUV was parked at the curb, engine running. As I approached, trying to walk past it as quickly as possible, the window rolled down. "Caspian." "Good evening, Jasper," he said, as casually as if we were old friends meeting by coincidence. My mouth went dry. What are you doing here?" "Making sure you get home safely," he replied, his tone matter-of-fact. "It's dangerous for an Omega to walk alone at night." "I've been walking alone for years," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "I don't need—" "Get in the car, Jasper." It wasn't a request. It wasn't even really a command. It was simply a statement of what was going to happen. As inevitable as sunrise. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to refuse, to run, to do anything except comply. But there was something in his eyes, not threat, not anger, but something else. Something that looked almost like concern. Against my better judgment, I opened the passenger door and slid into the seat. The moment the door closed, his scent enveloped me completely. Cedarwood, smoke, and something else. Something possessive and intoxicating that made my head spin. The car's interior felt simultaneously like a sanctuary and a trap. "Where do you live?" Caspian asked, pulling smoothly into traffic. I gave him my address, my voice barely above a whisper. We drove in silence for several minutes, the tension so thick I could hardly breathe. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" he asked, though I could see the slight smirk on his lips. "This. Following me. Watching me. I'm nobody. Just an Omega who runs a small bookstore. Why would someone like you even notice someone like me?" Caspian was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and serious. "Because you touched me, Jasper. Whether you meant to or not, whether you realize it or not, you touched me, and now—" He paused, his jaw tightening. "I can't stop thinking about you." My breath caught in my throat. Those words should have terrified me. Instead, they sent an unexpected warmth flooding through my chest. "That's not how it works," I whispered. "One accidental touch doesn't mean anything, doesn't it?" He glanced at me, and in that brief look I saw something raw and honest. "Then why can't I forget your scent? Why do I know exactly where you are every moment of the day?" The car pulled up in front of my building. I sat frozen, unable to process what was happening. "Get some rest, Jasper," Caspian said softly. "I'll see you tomorrow." I stumbled out of the car and into my building, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. When I reached my apartment and looked out the window, the black SUV was still there, Caspian's silhouette visible in the driver's seat. He was watching, waiting, protecting, and I realized with a jolt of fear and something else I couldn't name, my life had just become infinitely more complicated. The next 3 days passed in a surreal blur. I went through my daily routine, opening the bookstore, serving customers, organizing inventory, closing up, but nothing felt normal anymore. Because everywhere I went, I felt him. Not physically present, but there. A shadow I couldn't escape. On the second day, I found a coffee cup waiting on my bookstore counter when I arrived in the morning. Caramel latte. Still steaming hot. Exactly how I liked it. There was no note, no explanation. But I knew. The scent of cedarwood lingered faintly in the air. On the third day, a lunch delivery arrived during my afternoon shift. Grilled salmon with vegetables. My favorite meal from the restaurant 3 blocks away. The delivery person just shrugged when I asked who ordered it. "Already 4, they said. Including the tip. I should have been angry. I should have felt violated, stalked. Instead, I felt confused. Because these gestures weren't aggressive or possessive. They were careful, thoughtful, almost gentle. By the 4th day, I'd convinced myself I was handling the situation maturely. I would simply ignore Caspian's presence, live my life, and eventually he'd lose interest and move on. Enigmas were known for their short attention spans when it came to Omegas who didn't immediately submit. I was wrong. That evening, as I was restocking the poetry section, the bell above my door chimed. I called out without looking up. "We're closing in 15 minutes. I only need 5. That voice. Deep, commanding. Unmistakable. I spun around, nearly dropping the books in my arms. Caspian stood in my bookstore, looking completely out of place among the cozy shelves and warm lighting. He wore a dark suit that probably cost more than my entire month's rent. and his silver gray eyes were fixed directly on me. "What are you doing here?" I asked, setting the books down carefully to hide how much my hands were shaking. "Shopping," he said simply, moving toward the fiction section with surprising familiarity. "Do you have any recommendations?" This was absurd. "You don't strike me as someone who has time to read. You'd be surprised what I make time for." He pulled a book from the shelf, examined it briefly, then selected another. "Tell me, Jasper, do you enjoy working here?" The question caught me off guard. Yes, I do. It's quiet. Safe. Mine. Safe, he repeated, as if tasting the word. "Is that what you want? Safety, doesn't everyone?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I felt pinned in place by the intensity of his gaze. "Some people want more than safety. Some people want to feel alive. I feel alive just fine," I said defensively. "Do you?" He moved closer, and I backed up instinctively until I hit the bookshelf behind me. But he didn't crowd me. He stopped just far enough away to give me space while still making his presence overwhelming. "Because from where I stand, you look like someone who's been hiding for a very long time." His words hit too close to home. I looked away, unable to hold his gaze. "You don't know anything about me." "Not yet," he agreed. "But I want to. That's why I'm here. To interrogate me in my own bookstore, to understand you." He selected 3 books from the shelf, all classics I loved. How did he know? "I'll take these." I moved to the counter on shaky legs and rang up his purchases, trying to maintain some semblance of professional distance. The total came to $43. He handed me a $100 bill. "Keep the change," he said. "I can't accept them. Donate it to a charity of your choice." He took the bag of books, but didn't move toward the door. "Jasper, I need you to understand something. I'm not trying to frighten you. I'm not trying to control you. But I can't stay away from you either." "Why?" The question burst out of me before I could stop it. "Why me? I'm nothing special. I'm just—" "You fell asleep on my shoulder," he interrupted, his voice suddenly intense. "Do you have any idea how significant that is? Omegas don't relax around enigmas. They certainly don't trust us to sleep near us. But you did. Even unconsciously, even accidentally, you trusted me." "I was tired," I protested weakly. "Maybe. Or maybe some part of you recognized something in me. The same way some part of me recognized something in you." He reached out slowly, giving me time to pull away, and gently tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers barely brushed my skin, but I felt that touch like an electric shock. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. I'm just asking you to stop running long enough to figure out what this is." Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, his expression darkening. "I have to go," he said, frustration clear in his voice. "But tomorrow night, have dinner with me. A real dinner. No pressure, no obligations. Just 2 people getting to know each other, and if I say no," he smiled, but it was tinged with sadness, "then I'll respect your decision and find another way to ensure you're safe without intruding on your life. But I hope you'll say yes." He left before I could answer, the bell chiming softly as the door closed behind him. I stood there in my empty bookstore, my heart racing and my mind spinning. Everything about this situation screamed danger. Caspian was an enigma, a mafia boss, someone who lived in a world of violence and darkness. Getting involved with him would be insane. But when I closed my eyes, all I could think about was the gentleness in his touch, the vulnerability in his voice when he admitted he couldn't stay away. I locked up the store and walked home, hyper-aware of the black SUV that followed at a discreet distance. This time, instead of fear, I felt something else: curiosity. The next morning, I woke to find a small package outside my apartment door. Inside was a first edition of my favorite novel, one I'd mentioned in passing to a customer weeks ago. The note inside simply read, "Tomorrow night, 7 p.m. I'll send a car. Please say yes." I held the book in my hands, running my fingers over the precious cover, and made a decision that would change everything. I pulled out my phone and typed a single word: "Okay." His response came within seconds: "Thank you. You won't regret this." But as I got ready for work, a strange feeling settled over me. Not quite dread, not quite excitement. Something in between. Because I had a feeling that saying yes to dinner wasn't just about sharing a meal. It was about opening a door I might never be able to close again. And the truly terrifying part, Some reckless piece of my heart wanted to walk through it anyway. The morning started wrong. I woke up drenched in sweat, my body temperature slightly elevated, and a strange sensitivity in my skin that made even my soft cotton sheets feel abrasive. I checked my calendar twice, but there was no mistake, my heat cycle wasn't due for another 2 weeks. I took my suppressants as usual, convinced it was just stress manifesting physically. After all, having an Enigma Mafia boss pursuing you would make anyone's body react strangely. But as I got ready for work, the symptoms intensified. My clothes felt too tight, every sound seemed too loud, and my scent, normally subtle and easily controlled, was becoming more pronounced. This couldn't be happening. I called Dr. Arlo immediately, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Something's wrong with my cycle. I'm showing preheat symptoms, but it's way too early. Have you been in close proximity to any alphas recently? Dr. Arlo asked, his clinical tone doing nothing to calm my nerves. Particularly any enigmas? My stomach dropped. Yes. There's been an enigma around me. Why? The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Finally Dr. Arlo spoke, his voice grave. Jasper, enigma pheromones are exponentially more potent than standard alpha pheromones. Extended exposure can trigger early heat cycles, especially if there's been repeated close contact. How many times have you been near this individual? I thought about the train, the car rides, the bookstore visit, multiple times over the past week. That explains it. Your body is responding to his pheromones by accelerating your cycle. You need to isolate yourself immediately. Take double your usual dose of suppressants. Lock yourself in your apartment, and minimize many scent dispersal. Under no circumstances should you be near him when the full heat hits. Do you understand me? It could trigger an irreversible bond. How long until? I couldn't finish the question. Based on what you're describing, you have maybe 24 to 36 hours before full onset. Cancel everything. Stay home. Stay safe. I hung up and immediately texted the bookstore assistant manager, claiming a sudden illness. It wasn't entirely a lie. Then I went to my medicine cabinet and took the increased dose of suppressants, praying they would work. They didn't. By that afternoon, I knew I was in serious trouble. My temperature had climbed to 101 degrees. My scent had become so strong that I could smell it myself. Sweet vanilla and jasmine, unmistakable markers of an omega approaching heat. I stripped my bed, opened windows despite the risk, and took a cold shower that provided only temporary relief. My phone buzzed with messages from Caspian. Looking forward to tonight. The reservation is at 7:30. I hope you like Italian. Jasper? Everything okay? I stared at the messages, my vision slightly blurry from the fever. I needed to cancel. I needed to tell him to stay away. But my fingers wouldn't cooperate. The rational part of my brain was losing the battle against the biological imperative screaming through my system. By evening I was curled up on my couch, wrapped in blankets despite burning up, trying desperately to ride out the waves of heat that were intensifying by the hour. The suppressants had slowed the progression but couldn't stop it entirely. That's when I heard the knock. Jasper? It's Caspian. You didn't answer my messages. I'm worried. No. He couldn't be here. Not now. Go away. I called out, my voice hoarse and strained. I'm sick, you can't be here. Open the door, Jasper. Let me help. You can't help. I practically screamed, desperation making me cruel. You're the problem. Just leave me alone. Silence. Long, terrible silence. I thought maybe he'd actually listened. Then his voice came again, softer but more intense. I can smell you, Jasper. Even through the door. You're going into heat, aren't you? Tears streamed down my face. Please just go. Please. Are you safe? Do you have enough suppressants? Do you need a doctor? His concern was breaking me. I have everything I need, but you have to leave. Dr. Arlo said if you're here when it fully hits, it could trigger a permanent bond. You don't want that. Neither do I. Another pause. Then what if you're wrong about what I want? My heart clenched painfully. Caspian, I'm not leaving this hallway. Not until I know you're through the worst of it. Other enigmas, other alphas, they'll smell you from blocks away. Someone needs to guard your door. Let me do that. Let me protect you even if I can't be near you. You'll stay out there? For how long? However long it takes. I should have argued more. I should have called building security. Instead, I whispered, "Thank you." The night was agony. Heat cycles are always difficult, but this one was particularly brutal. My body was screaming for something it couldn't have, someone it couldn't reach. I took more suppressants, rationing them carefully. I drank water. I tried to sleep, and through it all, I could sense him on the other side of the door. Caspian, standing guard, protecting me from others while protecting me from himself. Around 3 a.m., at my absolute lowest point, I crawled to the door and pressed my hand against it. "Are you still there?" "Always," came his immediate response. His voice sounded strained, exhausted. "How are you holding up?" "It hurts." I admitted, too far gone to maintain pride. "Everything hurts." "I know, I'm sorry. If I could take it away, I would." "Tell me something," I said, needing a distraction. "Why are you really doing this?" He was quiet for so long I thought he might not answer. Then, "Because when you fell asleep on my shoulder for the first time in my entire life, I felt peaceful. You didn't see a monster or a mafia boss or an enigma to be feared. You just saw someone safe enough to rest beside. No one has ever given me that gift before." Fresh tears spilled down my cheeks. "I wasn't trying to give you anything. I was just tired." "I know. That's what made it so precious. It was real, unconscious, true." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I've spent my whole life being what others needed me to be. Dangerous, powerful, untouchable. But with you, even for those few minutes, I got to just be someone worth trusting. You barely know me. Then let me know you. When this is over, when you're well again, let me actually know you. No pressure, no expectations. Just honest conversation between two people trying to figure out if this thing between us is real or just biology." I rested my forehead against the door. "What if it's just biology? Then we'll both walk away, no harm done. And if it's not, then we'll figure it out together. One day at a time." As dawn broke, my fever finally started to break. The worst had passed. I dragged myself to the peephole and looked through it. Caspian was still there, leaning against the opposite wall, looking absolutely exhausted but alert. He'd stayed the entire night, protecting me, keeping his word. In that moment, something shifted inside me. Fear didn't disappear. It would probably never fully go away. But it made room for something else. Trust. Maybe, just maybe, this terrifying, impossible thing between us deserved a chance to be explored. Not today. Not until I was well and thinking clearly. But soon. I unlocked the door and opened it just a crack. Caspian's eyes widened. "Jasper, you should rest." "Thank you," I interrupted softly. "For staying. For keeping your promise." He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "Always." I closed the door again and finally allowed myself to sleep properly, knowing that for the first time in my life, someone was watching over me. Someone dangerous. Someone powerful. Someone who might actually care. 2 weeks passed after my heat finally subsided, and I deliberately avoided any direct contact with Caspian. Not completely, that would have been impossible. He was still there, hovering at the edges of my existence like a shadow I couldn't shake. But he kept his distance, respected the boundaries I'd silently established. Though distance was a relative term, every morning when I arrived at the bookstore, there was a fresh coffee waiting on the counter. Caramel latte still steaming, exactly as I preferred it. Sometimes there'd be a pastry from the bakery I loved but rarely visited. Never a note demanding acknowledgement, just a simple line like "Hope this brightens your morning," or "Remember to eat something." In the evenings when I locked up and headed home, I'd spot his black SUV parked across the street. He never approached, never called out, just watched until I was safely inside my building. It should have felt invasive, but instead it felt protected. I was losing my mind trying to understand it. Enigmas weren't supposed to be like this. They were supposed to be aggressive, demanding, overwhelming. They took what they wanted without asking permission. But Caspian? He was patient, gentle, giving me space while simultaneously making it clear he hadn't forgotten about me, and that terrified me more than any outright aggression would have. Friday evening arrived with dark clouds gathering overhead, the kind that promised a serious storm. I was closing the bookstore later than usual, having gotten absorbed in reorganizing the entire mystery section. By the time I stepped outside, the first drops were already falling. I fumbled with my keys, trying to lock the door quickly before the rain intensified. Too late. The sky opened up, releasing a deluge that soaked through my jacket in seconds. Jasper. I froze at the sound of my name. That voice. I'd know it anywhere now. Caspian was running toward me through the downpour, an umbrella in hand. His expensive suit was already drenched, his dark hair plastered to his forehead, but he didn't seem to care. He reached me and immediately held the umbrella over my head, leaving himself partially exposed to the rain. "What are you doing here?" I shouted over the sound of water hammering against pavement. My emotions were a chaotic mess. Frustration, gratitude, confusion all tangled together. "Making sure you don't catch pneumonia," he replied, his voice somehow calm despite the storm raging around us. "I don't need you to rescue me from weather." The words came out harsher than I intended, but 2 weeks of confusion and suppressed feelings were bubbling to the surface. "Why won't you just vase me alone?" "Because I can't." His answer was simple, direct, devastating. "You barely know me." I was shouting now, and I wasn't sure if it was anger or desperation driving my volume. "I'm nobody to you. Just some random omega who fell asleep on a train. Why do you keep doing this? You want to know why?" Caspian's voice rose to match mine, raw emotion cracking through his usual composure. "Because every morning I wake up thinking about whether you slept well. Because I catch wondering if you've eaten lunch or if you got too absorbed in your books and forgot. Because when you fell asleep on my shoulder something in my chest cracked open and I haven't been able to close it since." The rain was mixing with tears on my face now, and I couldn't tell which was which. "That's not fair. You can't just say things like that and I'm not expecting anything." He tossed the umbrella aside, letting the rain soak us both equally. His hands came up to frame my face, thumbs brushing water from my cheeks. "I'm trying to tell you the truth, that nervous habit you have, tucking your hair behind your ear when you're thinking hard about something. The way your whole face lights up when a customer asks about your favorite books. How you bite your lower lip when you're trying not to cry. I notice everything, Jasper, and it's driving me insane." "Stop," I whispered, but I didn't pull away from his touch. "You want me to stop noticing you? Stop caring if you're safe? Stop wanting to know everything about you?" His silver gray eyes were intense, searching my face like he was memorizing every detail. "Tell me how to stop feeling like I can finally breathe properly when you're near. Tell me how to forget the sound of your voice. Because I've tried, and I can't." "This is crazy," I said, my voice breaking. "You're an enigma, a mafia boss. You live in a world of violence and danger. I'm just the first person who ever made me feel human instead of monstrous. The first person who trusted me enough to be vulnerable in my presence, even unconsciously. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How precious?" The rain was relentless, plastering our clothes to our bodies, but neither of us moved. We stood there in the storm and I felt like I was drowning in more than just water. "I'm scared," I finally admitted. "Of you. Of this. Of what it might mean." "Good. I'm terrified too." His honesty shocked me. I've never felt this way about anyone. "I don't know what I'm doing. I just know that walking away from you feels impossible." "What are you asking from me?" "One real chance. Not coffee deliveries and silent protection. An actual opportunity to show you that this isn't just biology or obsession. That maybe, just maybe, we could be something real together." His hands were still cradling my face, and despite the cold rain, his touch was warm. "If you say no, I'll respect it. I'll disappear from your life. But I'm begging you to say yes." My logical brain was screaming warnings. Every omega instinct I possessed told me this was dangerous territory. But there was something in his eyes, vulnerability, hope, genuine fear of rejection, that looked nothing like the predatory enigma I'd been taught to avoid. "One chance," I heard myself say, the words barely audible over the rain. "Just one." The smile that transformed his face was worth every risk. It wasn't the predatory smirk I'd seen before, but something genuine and beautiful and almost heartbreakingly hopeful. He pulled me closer, wrapping his arms around me in a protective embrace that felt nothing like a cage. We stood there in the pouring rain, and for the first time since this whole insane situation began, I let myself relax against him. "Thank you," he murmured against my hair. "I promise I won't waste it." We eventually made our way to his car, both completely soaked. He turned the heat on full blast and drove me home without saying much. But the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It felt like something had shifted, like we'd crossed some invisible threshold. When we reached my building, he walked me to the door, despite still being drenched. "Tomorrow?" he asked. "Dinner at my place. Let me cook for you. Show you who I am when I'm not trying to be the terrifying enigma everyone expects." "Okay," I agreed, surprising myself with how much I meant it. As I rode the elevator up to my apartment, watching him return to his car through the lobby windows, I realized something fundamental had changed. The fear hadn't disappeared entirely. It probably never would. But it had made room for something else: curiosity, hope, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of trust. The rain continued to fall outside my window as I changed into dry clothes. But inside, something warm had taken root in my chest. Something dangerous and thrilling and absolutely terrifying. Tomorrow I would step fully into Caspian's world. And somehow I knew there would be no going back. Saturday evening arrived faster than I expected, bringing with it a nervous energy that made my hands shake as I got ready. Caspian had sent a car as promised. Not the intimidating black SUV, but a sleek sedan with a kind driver who made polite small talk during the drive into the hills outside the city. The estate appeared as we rounded a curve, and I caught my breath. Modern architecture blended seamlessly with the natural landscape, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the sunset. It was beautiful in an understated way. Nothing like the ostentatious mansion I'd been expecting. Caspian himself answered the door, and I almost didn't recognize him. Gone was the sharp suit and intimidating presence. He wore simple dark jeans and a soft gray sweater. His hair slightly tousled like he'd run his fingers through it nervously. He looked normal, approachable, almost shy. "You came," he said, and there was genuine relief in his voice. I said I would. I stepped inside, immediately struck by the warmth of the space. It smelled like garlic and herbs, completely at odds with what I'd imagined a mafia boss's home would smell like. "I hope you're hungry. I might have cooked too much." He led me through a stunning open-plan living area toward the kitchen, where I could see multiple pots on the stove. I wasn't what you liked, so I made options. Options? I couldn't help but smile at his obvious nervousness. Herb-crusted salmon, mushroom risotto, and a backup chicken piccata in case you don't like fish or mushrooms. He looked almost embarrassed. "I told you I might have overdone it." The image of this powerful enigma stress cooking multiple entrees because he wanted to impress me was so absurdly endearing that I felt my remaining reservations begin to crumble. Dinner was surprisingly easy. We talked about inconsequential things at first. Favorite movies, books we'd read recently, places we'd traveled. Caspian was well-read and thoughtful, with opinions that showed real depth. He asked questions that proved he'd been listening to every small detail I'd ever mentioned. After we'd finished eating and moved to the living room with wine, the conversation shifted to more personal territory. "Can I ask you something?" I settled into the comfortable couch, tucking my legs beneath me. "Why did you really join the Mafia?" His expression sobered immediately. He set his wine glass down carefully and stared out the massive windows at the city lights below. "I didn't join. I was born into it. My father ran the organization before me and his father before him. When you're an enigma in a family like mine, there are expectations. You're supposed to be ruthless, emotionless, the perfect weapon. And you became that." "I became what I needed to be to survive, to protect the people who depended on me." He turned to look at me, and the vulnerability in his eyes made my chest ache. "But being what others aid you to be means losing pieces of yourself." I forgot what it felt like to just exist, to be seen as something other than dangerous. "Until the train," I said softly. "Until you." He moved closer, not touching but near enough that I could feel his warmth. "You had no idea who I was. You were just exhausted, and somehow your instincts told you I was safe to rest beside." That simple act of unconscious trust meant more to me than you could possibly understand. I reached out and took his hand, lacing our fingers together. "I'm starting to understand." We sat like that for a while, holding hands and watching the city lights. It felt natural, easy in a way I hadn't expected. When he pulled me closer and I let my head rest against his shoulder, consciously this time, I felt him exhale like he'd been holding his breath. "This is nice," he murmured, his free hand gently stroking my hair. "It is," I agreed, feeling more relaxed than I had in weeks. Then his phone rang, shattering the peaceful moment. He looked at the screen and his entire demeanor changed. That hard edge sliding back into place like armor. I need to take this. He stood, already moving toward his office. I'm sorry, I listened to the muffled sound of his voice through the door, unable to make out words but hearing the sharp, commanding tone that reminded me exactly who and what he was. When he emerged several minutes later, his expression was grim. There's a situation at one of my warehouses. I need to go handle it personally. He looked genuinely torn. I know this ruins the evening and I'm sorry, but go. I interrupted. Do what you need to do. Stay here, please. My security team is on the property and you'll be completely safe. I'll be back as soon as I can. He hesitated, then cupped my face gently. I really am sorry, I understand. Just be careful. He kissed my forehead, a gesture so tender it made my heart skip, then was gone. I should have felt abandoned or upset, but instead I found myself wandering his home, learning about him through the details he'd left behind. Books on philosophy and poetry sat beside tactical manuals. A guitar in the corner suggested hidden creativity. Photos showed him with people who looked like family, his expression softer than I'd ever seen it. This was the real Caspian, complex, multifaceted, human despite everything working against that perception. I eventually settled back on the couch, pulling a soft throw blanket around myself. The events of the past weeks caught up with me, and my eyes grew heavy. I told myself I'd just rest them for a moment. I woke to the sound of the front door opening. Disoriented, I sat up to see early morning light filtering through the windows. I'd slept for hours. Caspian stood in the entryway, and my heart stopped. His clothes were torn, there was blood on his shirt and a cut above his eyebrow. He looked exhausted and shaken in a way that made him seem more vulnerable than I'd ever imagined. You're still here, he said, and his voice cracked slightly. You stayed. I crossed to him quickly, my hands hovering over his injuries, afraid to touch in case I hurt him. Are you okay? Should I call a doctor? It's not my blood. Well, mostly not. He caught my hands in his, holding them against his chest. I'm fine. But Jasper, we need to talk. About what this means. About the danger I've brought to your doorstep by caring about you. The seriousness in his tone made my stomach drop. What happened? Come sit down. There are things you need to know. Things that might change how you feel about giving me that chance. As dawn broke over the city, I realized we were about to cross another threshold. One that would force me to decide not just if I could care about Caspian, but if I was strong enough to survive in his world. And looking at his blood-stained clothes and haunted eyes, I wasn't sure I knew the answer. I guided Caspian to the bathroom, my hands surprisingly steady despite the anxiety coursing through me. He sat on the edge of the bathtub while I carefully cleaned the cut above his eyebrow with supplies from his well-stocked first aid kit. You should see the other guy, he joked weakly, then winced when I applied antiseptic. Not funny. My voice was sharper than I intended, but fear made me abrasive. You said we need to talk, so talk. He caught my wrist gently, stilling my movements. Let me finish cleaning up first, then I'll tell you everything. I promise. 20 minutes later, he'd showered and changed into clean clothes. We sat in his living room as sunrise painted the sky in shades of pink and gold. 2 mugs of coffee growing cold between us. My business rivals attacked one of my main distribution centers last night. Caspian began, his voice carefully controlled. It was coordinated, planned. They wanted to send a message. Several of my people were injured, though thankfully no one died. I listened silently, letting him continue. But that's not the worst part. During the chaos, they made it very clear they've been gathering intelligence on me. They know about my routines, my properties, my associations. He paused, his jaw tightening. They know about you, Jasper. They have photographs, surveillance footage from the train station, your bookstore, your apartment building. They know exactly who you are and what you mean to me. The coffee mug nearly slipped from my nerveless fingers. What? They're going to use you to get to me. It's what they do, find weaknesses and exploit them mercilessly. His hands clenched into fists. By pursuing you, by allowing myself to care about you, I've painted a target on your back. Fear crawled up my spine, but I forced myself to think clearly. So what are our options? He looked surprised that I said our instead of walking out immediately. I can protect you, completely, thoroughly, but it would mean officially bringing you into my world. under my protection as my bonded mate. Once that's done, you become untouchable. Harming you would mean declaring war on me, and no one wants that. And if I say no, then I relocate you. New city, new identity, financial security for life. You'd be safe, but we'd never see each other again. It's the only way to ensure they can't use you against me. His voice was steady, but I could see the pain in his eyes. Your safety matters more than my feelings. The choice he was offering wasn't really a choice at all. It was an ultimatum delivered by circumstance, and we both knew it. There's a third option, I said slowly, which is, I could just continue my normal life and take my chances. Maybe they're bluffing. No. His voice was sharp, final. That option doesn't exist. I won't gamble with your life, but you'll ask me to gamble with my future? My freedom? I stood, pacing across the room. Either I bond with you permanently or I disappear forever. Those are my only choices. I know it's not fair. I know I've ruined your life by being selfish enough to want you. He stood too but didn't approach. I'm sorry, Jasper. I'm so damn sorry. But I won't let them hurt you. Even if it means losing you myself. I stared out at the sunrise, my mind racing. This was insane. A month ago, my biggest concern was whether to reorder more mystery novels. Now I was deciding between bonding with an Enigma Mafia boss or vanishing into witness protection. Tell me something, I said without turning around. If I choose to stay, to bond with you, what does that actually look like? Don't sugarcoat it. I need the truth. You'd live here, under constant security. My enemies would know touching you means their destruction, which makes you safer than you've ever been. But you'd also be tied to my world. The danger, the violence, the constant uncertainty. You'd be the partner of someone people fear and hate. He came to stand beside me, not touching but close. I'd give you everything I have, everything I am, but I can't promise you peace or normalcy. What about love? The question slipped out before I could stop it. I already love you, he said simply. I have since you fell asleep on my shoulder. Maybe that makes me insane, but it's true. Whether you choose me or choose safety, that won't change. Tears burned my eyes. This impossible, dangerous, complicated man loved me. And somewhere along the way, despite all logic and self-preservation, I'd fallen for him too. I'm terrified, I whispered. So am I. I turned to face him fully, studying his features in the growing light. There were shadows under his eyes, stress lines around his mouth. He looked as scared as I felt, which somehow made this easier. If I do this, if I choose you, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Never lie to me. Not to protect me. Not to make things easier. If we're doing this, we're doing it as equals. I need to know what I'm facing. Oh, I promise. Complete honesty, no matter how difficult. He held out his hand. What else? I don't become your property, I'm your partner, your mate. But I'm still myself. I still make my own decisions about my life, my work, my choices. Agreed. You're not someone to be controlled, Jasper. You're someone to be cherished. I took his hand, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. Then yes, I'm choosing you, choosing us. Even though it's terrifying and crazy and might be the worst decision I've ever made, the relief that flooded his expression was almost painful to witness. Are you sure? Once we bond, I'm sure. I stepped closer, reaching up to touch the now bandaged cut above his eyebrow. I'm choosing the person who stood guard outside my door all night during my heat. Who respects my boundaries even when it costs him. Who looks at me like I'm something precious instead of something to possess. He pulled me into his arms, holding me like I might disappear. I'll spend every day proving you made the right choice. You better, I said against his chest, breathing in his scent. Because I'm giving up my entire life for you. And I'm giving you mine in return. Everything I have, everything I am, it's yours. We stood there as the sun fully rose. Two people from completely different worlds choosing to build something new together. It wouldn't be easy. There would be danger and challenges I couldn't even imagine yet. But as Caspian tilted my chin up and kissed me, gently at first, then with growing passion and promise, I knew I'd made my choice. Not because it was safe or logical, but because sometimes the thought knows truths the mind can't accept. I was his, and he was mine. For better or worse, in danger and in peace, forever. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way.